All right, so I'll be brief with the introductions. I think everyone knows Dr. Mark Edberg. He's the director and PI of the Avance Center for the Advancement of Immigrant and Refugee Health and a co-investigator on the center's research core. He's an applied and academic anthropologist with over 25 years of experience in social and public health research, currently associate professor in the Department of Prevention and Community Health with secondary appointments in anthropology and the LA School of International Affairs. In addition to directing the Avance Center, he has the Global-Oriented Center for Social Wellbeing and Development with projects in South Africa, Indonesia, Jamaica, and has conducted prior work in UNICEF, with UNICEF in the Latin American Caribbean region. It's relevant to what we're talking about today because he's responsible for developing adolescent youth well-being indicators for the Latin Caribbean region and has been part of an expert panel to assist UNICEF in developing these measures. Down the end of the desk is Ms. Daniela Dietz-Chavez, who's a research associate in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics. She supports the work of the center's research core, and we call her Nelly, so Nelly, you want to call her Sorry. Received her MPH from Tulane University in New Orleans, and prior to that worked with Salem Vaccine Institute on immunization and American Health Organization. My name is Sean Cleary. I'm the co-director of the Avance Center, director of the research core. I am an associate professor in the Department of Epidemiology here, and I worked with Mark on SAFER and other projects I'm being part of over the past decade. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark to discuss what positive youth development is.
Okay, so I'll try not to be too professor-like. Although my slides kind of look professor-like, they're sort of boring and they got lots of text there, but we'll try to talk around that. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is the theoretical approach we're using for Adelante and why we are picking that theoretical approach and the way we've adapted it before we go on and look at some of the specifics. So just to start with, I mean, one of the things, so, generally when we think about health disparities, one of the things that I guess we've advocated for a long time is not to think of them narrowly, or not to think of Band-Aids or a single health issue as isolated from not only its context, but other related health issues. And so you can think of health disparities as always occurring, or most of the time occurring in clusters. So if you were doing work with HIV/AIDS, for example, HIV/AIDS, violence, substance abuse, TB, they occur in clusters and they're related to the same social determinants. And there's a great word for that. I just like this word, so I just keep saying it. And that term is syndemic. So it's like a synchronous epidemic. So health disparities can, that's one way to think of them, is these clusters that are sort of syndemic clusters. One of the syndemic clusters like that, affecting youth in Langley Park and other Latino youth too, is associated with substance abuse. And there's a number of other health risks that are associated with that. Family and partner violence, interpersonal violence, sexual risk are documented in other literature and other research as being associated with substance abuse. Data from our previous intervention, our first intervention actually, say for Latinos, also showed that substance abuse was what we call kind of a risk node. You can think of it as this kind of a point at which that clustering occurs or occurs around. So our starting point for thinking about health disparities in Latino immigrant youth was that there was this cluster. And there are other health disparities as well, but there certainly was this cluster which was very, very present. So another, not to throw out another sort of jargon term, but when you have a syndemic like this, and maybe even multiple syndemics, that's lots of disparities conditions that are associated with a circumstance, a shared circumstance, you can think of it again as kind of a social ecology of risk. Okay, does that make sense, that term? So you've got a whole ecology of situations that are feeding into each other and creating vulnerability for a whole range of health risk. And that's how we understood some of the issues that we were thinking about with Latino youth. And we have a lot of data from our previous interventions that support that. So for example, from the Safer Latinos Project, we had data on family conflict that resulted from a sequential migration pattern. Parents or an adult coming first, kid coming later, and then that whole reunification issue and a lot of situations surrounding family integration that pushed youth out. So here's one factor in a whole community that contributes to youth involvement sort of in a street context. And then if you add to that all of the barriers that youth faced when they were trying to come from these situations and do well or even succeed or even stay in school. Not only language barriers, but cultural barriers, kids who have to work and work late and it's hard for them to get homework done. And kids whose father has been deported and they go through a crisis. All these sorts of things, in addition to just unfamiliarity with the system. So that's a whole nother set of factors that are in this one community system, this social ecology. And then we also had a lot of data about what you could call low community efficacy. That is kind of a shared belief in the community that it was difficult to do anything about any problem, and that people were afraid to try for many reasons, including the immigration context, but others as well. And then add to that, you have the presence of gangs, which for some youth might act as a kind of compensatory social support structure. Along with that, in a study that followed, we had a lot of very interesting data, and Dr. Andrade was very much involved in this project, the MOSIS project, where we saw the nature of relationships that in some cases promoted gender violence or partner violence, where people are coming up and they're establishing these temporary relationships, even if they have relationships back home or family relationships back home, as a means of coping with the economic situation that they faced. So leading to almost like an instrumental or a contractual type sort of partnership. So violence resulting when somebody's not holding up their end of the bargain. Again, as a result of the overall community situation. And then we have quantitative data, for example, showing a link between violence involvement and victimization to lack of school support, lower aspirations and expectations for the future, again related to this idea of the community efficacy, but its impact on individual efficacy. These things were associated with less time with family and involvement with gangs. So again, you've got this whole situation where multiple factors interact, create a lot of vulnerability to multiple risks. Okay, so when you have that kind of situation, one of the lessons learned from that is that prevention efforts that are targeted, that operate sort of like band-aids, are not going to be effective, even if they're effective in a very narrow context of increasing knowledge about whatever it might be. They're not really going to change the disparity situation. So for Adelante, we needed to try and find a theoretical approach that incorporated this idea of a social ecology of risk and was an attempt to address that, not in a sort of band-aid context. And so what we have adapted is this approach that's called positive youth development. Now, you hear a lot of interventions out there, and if you read the literature, there's a lot of things that are called positive youth development. Some of them which have no relation to any theory at all. It's just an after-school, recreation program or something that would just be called positive youth development. But generally, in the literature, PYD or positive youth development, these are approaches that focus on building assets and strength to increase resilience against risk. So the more you build up resilience, the less likely the youth are going to be involved in risk behavior. So that's the general idea behind the various kinds of positive youth development approaches. Many times, PYD approaches are contrasted to a set of approaches that are called kind of risk and protective factors approaches, which in practice tend tend to focus on trying to not so much build up the resilience, but prevent the negative influences that kids might have that lead them into risky situations. So one is a sort of prevent the negative, and the other is kind of accentuate the positive. So there are two sides of the coin there. But even with that, within kind of the theoretical PYD school, there are different kinds of approaches. That kind of risk and protective factors approach has evolved, or at least some of the people who were in the literature very well known or very, very much associated with that, have evolved to focus a little more on protective factors than they used to. And so there is a stream of PYD literature which kind of comes from that, risk and protective factors. I refer to it as probably not so nice for me to do that, but I refer to those as kind of a list approach, because there tends to be a list of like 15 or more traits, essentially, that you try and build, and that these are correlated with positive outcomes. Not to say that that's not true, but if we are thinking in terms of this, social ecology of risk, an integrated, organic system that works together to promote vulnerability, for us, it was not enough to think of these specific traits to promote among kids. So we pulled from another stream of PYD that we just labeled sort of the ecological positive youth development approach, which does include some personal characteristics and too, but includes lots of constructs in there that have to do with a relationship with the community. And so there is this emphasis in this approach on the person, environment, context. In other words, to use kind of a simple example, if you are training youth in career development or job development, and you don't also have jobs, what's the point? So the holistic approach, this person, environment, context, means if you go in there with an intervention like that, you need to work at the community level and the individual level. There needs to be something for those. When those kids gain some skills, whatever they may be, they need to go somewhere. They need to have something that helps them flourish. And this sort of PYD approach is focused more in that way as opposed to just developing kind of characteristics or positive traits among youth. And it made a lot of sense. For all that we have come to learn about Langley Park, this kind of approach made sense. So that's what we've used. There are these in kind of just the general PYD literature of this, the ecological type. There are these constructs which are pretty vague because this kind of sort of stream of PYD thinking is still emergent. So these are pretty, building competence, building confidence, connection, character, and caring, which leads to contribution to a community, or to family, or to other kinds of institutions. These are sort of the overall PYD constructs. We picked out the ones that you see that have an asterisk as making most sense for Langley Park, because it was our view that it wasn't an issue of character so much, or building character in youth, or building caring. It was really these more systemic community level things that we needed to think about. Confidence, ability to negotiate the circumstance, connection to family, to peer, to supportive institutions, and contribution. So increasing, kids' investment in that community, because as we've seen in Langley Park, if you're working in a community where people don't think anything can change, they're afraid to make a change for good reason. How are you going to come to a point or move that community to where people have more investment in doing something about the situation? So that's part of this process also, ultimately. So we, using those four constructs, we took a lot of time to adapt them to the Latino context, because the Latino community context, because if you drew from established instruments, which of course, that's the starting point, one of the sources, for example, for positive youth development surveys and questionnaires is the Search Institute. I don't know how many of you have seen or heard of the Search Institute, but they're very well known for, they have a lot of instruments that people use about sort of youth positive assets, but a lot of those things don't there are, so how many clubs are kids involved in, or how many, things like this, after-school activities, the kinds of things that don't exist very much in Langley Park. So we did not find a lot of those instruments to be useful in many ways. So we spent a lot of time, again, redefining, and for example, we took that overall construct of competence and divided it up, thinking about the specific ways in which kids or adults or parents would need to be competent in order to better negotiate the circumstance that they're in. So, for example, you could think of multicultural efficacy or multicultural competence as one way to measure the kind of competence that's important in this community. Because parents, for example, if they are trying to get services for their kids or to find out what's going on at school, they need to be able to have that kind of those skills and the communicative knowledge to be able to ask, or to even know they can ask, or to figure out who to ask. That was, that's just one of the ways in which we thought about defining that overall construct of competence. So after working that out, the intervention, which consists of many parts, as you can see, these are, and really blessings to the entire team that worked all this out, because it's an incredible amount of work. We have, for every one of the intervention components there, they have been worked out in terms of the PYD constructs they address. There are, depending on the type of intervention, in other words, if it's a curriculum where we have the same kids over 8 weeks or something, or we can measure pre and post, we have data that's not only about their increasing skills or knowledge, but about the PYD construct. So, and we know this is very hard. That our partner, the Maryland Multicultural Youth Center, probably wants to tear our hair out or do something to us half the time, because we keep saying we have to develop the PYD measures for everything that happens, and it's a burden. It is, we know it. But we're it's a bit of a lucha here, because in order to get funding or to get any kind of legitimacy for these kind of interventions, we got to actually, and so that's the internal issue that we're always working with. So those were all measured out, and we had other measures that we understood to be also factors that figured into whether kids succeeded, future expectations, their coping skills, depression, and their views on whether or not discrimination was happening, so on and so forth. But anyway, the intervention was activities that focused on PYD and other changes, which then theoretically lead to better outcomes in terms of the health disparities that we're talking about. This is one of those things that you always have to have a spaghetti model here. But if you could sort of get into the model model thinking for a moment, you've got over there, you've got sort of activities for youth that build capacity and skills, community activities where they're doing work in the community or integrating with the community or doing advocacy or media, other things like that. Those are PYD kinds of activities, as well as knowledge and skill building. Those theoretically then lead to increasing those PYD constructs, increasing connection with the community, connection with family, so on and so forth, which then theoretically leads to an improvement in the community environment and the person-environment context. So hopefully, by building their skills, by building parental skills, and we didn't really get far on some of the other levels that we would have liked to get to. We didn't quite get there yet. We started working with the Community Advisory Board and what we call the Youth Pathways program, where we were trying to get businesses and organizations in the community to link up and have internships with youth, again, as part of that integration of community and youth development. We did start that, but it's still sort of in its emerging stages. But that's part of that process too. So working together, the idea was that this would all produce risk behavior. And as you will hear more about, we had several kind of subdivisions. We had interventions that were, this is a community-based intervention, so a lot of things are aimed at the community in general. Within that, however, we had a group that was originally conceptualized as a higher risk cohort, that is, kids who were at higher risk for any of those issues that we were talking about before. it turned out when, that there were so many high-risk youth in the community that separating them out in that way just didn't make a lot of sense. And some of the instruments that would be used to try and screen for those that were high risk or not, it just didn't work out. So, but we still have ended up with a cohort of parent-youth dyads that get a little extra attention in some ways. They are eligible for certain activities, particularly case management, parent-family dinners, and some things like that, which are a little more intense. But they also participate in other interventions. And then you'll hear much more about this, but in order to collect that data, we had a community survey, which again was a result of this extensive effort to adapt these constructs and define measures. And we collected data at baseline, year 3, and finished collecting year 5 data. And these, the end for that is 1,200, and that includes both our intervention community of Langley Park and comparison community, Colmore in Virginia. And then we collected data from the cohort. So that was actually data that we could collect longitudinally from a group of people. The parent group dyads, and then in addition, lots of process data. We had a very extensive kind of 5-level designation for each of the activities that's in the intervention, depending on how much data we could collect for youth who are in that. So anyway, all flows, or at least our attempt was to make it all flow from that possible response rate. So I will now turn it over to Dr. Cleary.
So I just want to give you a little background before Nellie starts talking about some of the process data from where this is coming from. So as Mark mentioned, we have a community sample in Langley Park and Colmore, and the community sample includes both youth and young adults. So all we're going to talk about today is youth, so that we can compare them to the youth in the cohort. Yeah, we have parent and child dyads in the cohort, but I'm just going to talk about parent data. So I just wanted to show you this slide that shows that there are differences between the two. The community youth are randomly selected from the population. We do a 2-stage random cluster sampling design to try to get a representative sample. But this is a very dynamic population. Okay, so we did our first survey in 2012, we've done it again in 2014, and we're just finishing up in 2016. And the population has changed, as you all know, between 2014 and 2016 dramatically. All right, so whereas our cohort youth are self-selected, and even the youth in our cohort has changed over time. And now, as you can see from the data here, although there's equal in terms of male and female, in the cohort, there's a lot fewer that were born in the United States. Only 28% were born in the United States. You can really see that when you look at the length of time they've been in the United States. So 70% of the sample has been in the United States for less than 3 years in the cohort. Okay? So there's some differences like that that are important to remember when we look at the data that we're going to show a little bit. And this shows a little more detail in terms of percent of the population born in the United States, and then how long they've been in the United States. You can see we have, in the beginning when we started, which is the tan line here, we had a lot more people that lived here longer, a lot more that were born in the United States, and then it's gone down over time. So getting back to the PYD, so as Mark mentioned, there are 4 main constructs, but I just want to point out the fact that we have actually different domains. So when we talk about connection, we actually developed measures of connection to the family, to the community, social, cultural, friends, romantic partners in the school, and then as you also mentioned in terms of competence. So we have academic competence, athletic, civic action, work ratings, and multicultural. And so I just wanted to show you a few of the questions so you get a sense of what we're talking about. So self-confidence is really self-efficacy. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. Where you feel your personal values, good quality. You can see a number of these that you feel you're a failure or not very proud of yourself. We just asked as well with a reverse score, but they are pulled together to measure confidence. And then academic competence is more specific to how well one does in school and how well one doesn't do in school, as well as athletic competence. So these, we pull this data together, we estimate means for all the responses of the youth, and then we calculate the measures that we're going to talk about. So Natalie is going to now talk a little bit about the specific activities that have been implemented at Adelante and some of the ways we've measured PYD for each of those activities. So it's very short term. Some of these activities last 8 to 10 weeks. Some of them are even shorter than that. But we did collect pre-post data and we collected PYD data on all these activities.
All right, I tend to start speaking softly, so if I do, just let me know. So the following data, like Sean was just saying, is derived from the pre and post tests that the participants complete at the beginning and end of each program offered by Adelante, which is facilitated by the NYC case managers, which many of them are here in the front row today and are awesome. So raise your hands. The pre-post tests that are completed touch upon questions such as those. Oh, sorry, just sit down. So we're just going to present some data on the 2016 programs that were completed, although there have been many, many more. There are a couple that overlap 2015 2016 just because they were at the end of the year. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. So this is the violence prevention program. It's relatively new and was developed after a youth focus group demonstrated the high prevalence of bullying that the youth are dealing with mainly at school. The program focused on increasing youth knowledge on the different aspects of bullying, especially cyberbullying, and went more specifically of topics such as cyberbullying, gang violence, and prevention, and then also legal consequences such as violence, and stress the importance of education. So here we see that the program PYD exposures most touched upon during the program were connection and competence. Looking more closely at the breakdowns, there was a large focus of time spent on connection to school and friends, as well as school and family competence PYD constructs. So for the next one, we're looking at percent positive changes among youth who completed the whole program. The large increase observed was a 67% positive change among connection to cultural identity, followed by competence, and connection to friends. This program is reaching excellence. The program was developed to help youth improve on skills such as leadership, communication, advocacy, job, school, and health knowledge, as well as increased knowledge of community resources. The program PYD exposures most touched upon during this program were almost half devoted to connection, followed by competence. Looking more closely, we can see the breakdowns. There was a large focus of time spent on connection to school and friends, and when viewing competence exposure, more clearly we see a focus on school, friends, and community. So for our positive change, there's a 50% youth experience, 50% of youth experience an increase in their connection to community. Connection to friends and confidence proved similar, increases at 25% each. SHAPE is another program facilitated by the Adelante case managers that focuses on molding sexual health advocates, promoters, and educators with the hopes of having the youth facilitators then provide information to their communities and friends. So really trying to educate the youth to then be able to, in turn, go back into their community and provide the resources that they've been handed from the programs and case managers. Competence and connection were stressed the most during this program, and the greatest portion of exposure time was placed within the connection to PYD, where we further see a focus on friends and romantic partner, which are important when educating on sexual health and knowledge. So here we see 67 and 50% increase in competence within civic action and connection to community, respectively, which is very important again when addressing youth to in turn be able and feel confident enough to they themselves go back into the community and educate on these topics. Adelante Ambassadors is a newer program for which we don't currently have the more detailed PYD constructs that are the pie charts. However, it was a very successful program, and a large percent positive changes were found among several PYD constructs here. The program focused on involving youth in planning and creating and filming of Adelante campaign videos and social media promotion within their community, all of which contain positive messages and themes such as live your dream, which is one of the themes that they have for their campaigns. So mainly here we see a larger positive change among participants in confidence in civic action and connection to community and confidence, all of which would be hoped for when being part of these campaigns within the community. Prelift is also a very successful program among the youth that come to Adelante. This program steers its topics towards sexual health. Sessions cover sexual rights, pregnancy and birth control, STI knowledge, and gender and sex topics. There is an added highlight in this program that is a youth facilitator at each session that has been previously chosen after completing the SHAPE program that I just described. And I've been able to go to some of those sessions, and I know that they love it, and they're always really happy to be kind of a part of the facilitating of the program. So here we see a connection, that connection and sex risk are the main PYD contributors. The greatest portion of exposure time was placed within the connection PYD, and of course underlying connection to romantic partner and friends, given the topic of this program. There's also a large focus placed on knowledge and prevention skills within sex risk. So the main increase in % positive changes among the youth participants is knowledge, which is great, and confidence, closely followed by connection to romantic partner and content of programs such as STI knowledge. To see such a large improvement in knowledge and confidence is great because those are large contributors to safe sex and pregnancy prevention. And this is a very popular program with the youth at Adelante. So lastly, we have the program Family Dinners. I think Mark touched upon it a little bit, which works as a method and tool to support reunification of youth with their families, and especially parents. As we know, too often is the case that parents and youth don't come to the U.S. At the same time within this population. So the program is implemented with the objective of increasing the rate of positive exchanges between family members through the process of co-creating stories while acknowledging parent or child emotions and their feelings, trying to really get them to connect and have that line of communication open to strengthen positive interactions. So here we can see that connection, competence, and contribution are the main PYD program exposure focuses for this program. And looking more closely, we see there is an emphasis on connection to family and friends at 61 and 23% respectively. Lastly, this is just comparing the parent and youth % positive changes. We found very similar increase among connection to family and family competence at over 50% each for the parents, which is definitely what this program aims to improve and strengthen, so that hopefully, even if the children are showing slightly lower % positive changes, hoping that with the parents having those tools that they'll be able to then implement them at home and continue those improvements.
So I'm going to finish this out by sharing some of the data we have from the cohort and the community. So one of the first questions we have to ask is, are we measuring, or how reliable are we measuring what we intended to measure? So this table shows you alphas, which are a measure of internal consistency and reliability, for the cohort youth as well as the community youth, for all of the different PYD constructs. And it is quite remarkable how consistent they are, particularly since we created so many instruments. So pat ourselves on the back. But it is pretty remarkable. And because these are two very different populations, remember our cohort youth are kids that are we're actively engaged with who come to MMYC and actually participate in our activities, where community youth are just a random sample from the population. So the fact that we see, and they're all quite good, even these lower ones with academic competence and other competence, anything below 0.8 is what's desired. So across the board, these constructs seem to be very reliable. So I'm going to talk about trends in the cohort, and then I'll talk about trends in the community just for comparison purposes. So this graphic shows you the mean scores. These are adjusted mean scores for the variables down below. Age, gender, U.S. born, years in the United States in education, across the cohort. So this is longitudinal data for the 238 youth that have been recruited for this study. So on the left hand, on the y-axis is the adjusted mean. Wave 1 was the baseline data. Wave 2 was the first follow-up that was midway between the length of time that they were participating in the program, and Wave 3 was the final survey when they were exiting from the Adelante program. And then I've just put contribution, connection to family, civic action, competence, and work competence on here. And there's two things to note about this graphic. The first is that these PYD constructs are pretty robust and consistent over time. And this is without taking into consideration other factors. These are adjusted estimates, but they're pretty stable over time. And the second, which may not surprise most of us here, is that they're given different weights. So connection to family has the strongest weight out of all the PYD constructs. And this contribution, which is, as Mark pointed out, sort of an ancillary factor after you gain a level of asset in the other three, the contribution that kicks in is at the lowest level. And so the top represents connection to the family, and the next is work competence, and then we have civic action connection. So they're pretty consistent over time. Again, these are the same youth followed for up to 18 months. Now the next few slides I'm putting out there just so you can see. This is fairly new data. In fact, we haven't actually finished all of the Wave 3 surveys, so we're missing some of the data here. Okay? These again are adjusted means among the youth from baseline to termination. And then what I simply did was divided it by whether they participated in any of the activities that both Mark and Ellie talked about or not. Okay? So even though we have 238 youth and they're in the Adelante program and they complete our surveys, they don't necessarily actually participate in the activities. Actually, only about 44% of the youth that are in the cohort participate in Adelante activities. Okay? That's because it's open to whoever wants to participate. All right? And so what you see is at baseline, they both were fairly high in terms, and this work competence is how prepared youth feel they are to start a job. And some of them are working, but not all of them are working. So it's just more workforce preparation competence. You can see that now, despite the dip and the change, this isn't statistically significant. You got to look at the y-axis here; it's truncated. But you do see a decrease over time, and then for I've been trying to figure out what's happening here, why those that don't participate in Adelante actually may have more work confidence. And that may be because they actually are working. Okay? And because they're working, they can't participate in Adelante activities. All right? So these are some of the things that we still have to figure out what in fact may be explained what's going on. The next is connection to family. And again, it's fairly stable over time, and we see actually lower levels among youth that are pursuing Adelante programs. And statistically, they're not different from each other. But oftentimes, the kids that are coming are dealing with issues related to the family. That's why they may not be experiencing the same connection. Remember, a lot of these, one of the biggest issues is reunification in families. And so that may be the basis for what we see some lower levels. The third is contribution. And we see this is going up among the Adelante, so youth. And that, you know, without specific information, because we don't actually know whether they participated in any of the CASA activities here on the mall or marches for immigration rights and things of that nature, but that could be leading to the contribution, increase in contribution. Right. So now we're going to switch gears and talk about what we see in the community. So I just want to remind you these are not the same kids followed over time. So what we do are take 3 random samples of the population in 2012, 2014, and 2016. And those samples differ markedly over time because of what's happened in both Langley Park and Colmore. Right? And what's also different here is we have 2 sets of data. We have the Langley Park data and we have the Colmore data, indicated by different colored lines. So we're just sort of measuring confidence in the community. This is not, again, these are adjusted means because there are differences in age, gender, length of time in the United States, whether they're born in the United States, and who they're living with in the United States. But these are fairly, again, they're not statistically significant, consistent. Those in Langley Park are experiencing somewhat higher level of confidence than Colmore, but both are going down. So if you can think of any reasons why people may be feeling more confident living in Langley Park or Colmore. There are a lot of reasons. Again, there's a lot of environmental factors that could be influencing the level of confidence that youth feeling. So the point, and I haven't showed you our role in terms of Adelante yet, but is that there are external forces that are also influencing the level of PYD that an individual may be experiencing. And that's what we're doing here. In terms of connection to school, they're fairly consistent as well, somewhat higher in Langley Park, but going down as well. This is not what you want to see as a researcher. You got to remember, we're anticipating that the PYDs are going to influence and everything is going to go up. And
well, we are. But there's some things, there's some explanations.
Yeah.
I'll jump in.
Okay. And then connection to friends are fairly consistent. More, again, not significantly different, but fairly consistent across the 3 different surveys. So the last slide, I tried to incorporate both aspects. The change over time, as well as any contact with Adelante. Okay? And I just used a single indicator here. It's the question that everyone in the community was asked, not in baseline. Okay? So this right here is, they're not different from each other. That's because they had no exposure to Adelante in 2012. So the Adelante intervention occurred after that time. And so we simply asked, have you heard of the Adelante program? And it's one of many questions that we ask related to involved in the community of involvement in Adelante. Okay? And what you can see, first off, so there's 4 lines here. The dark green is Colmore, those that have heard of Adelante. The dark red is Langley Park, among those who have also heard of Adelante. And then the dashed lines, tan and blue, representing Colmore and Langley Park, among you who said they've never heard of Adelante. So first off, you'll know that respectively, so Langley Park compared to Langley Park and Colmore compared to Colmore, those that have heard of Adelante report contributing to the community more than those who haven't heard of Adelante. Okay? That's indicated by the dark green compared to the blue, dashed blue, and the dark red compared to the dashed tan. Okay? But then what we see too, even though we see a constant increase in Langley Park among those that have heard of Adelante, we see a much greater increase in Colmore in terms of reporting contribution. Now, when we look at the left-hand side here, this is fairly low levels. And in fact, there's not a statistically significant difference because this is, again, a truncated left-hand scale. So we don't see a huge change here, but we are seeing differences across the groups, and that may be indicating that Adelante is having some impact on contribution to the community. Okay? So in summary, in answer to the question, what is it and what we've learned, we can say that these PYD measures are fairly reliable across the groups. And what I didn't show you is the parent data or the young adult data. The alphas are fairly consistent in those groups as well, relative to what we see in the youth. Even though the questions aren't exactly the same, the questions aren't the same because obviously the youth are in school and the young adults are working and may have their own families, so they're slightly different. The second is that these community constructs are relatively stable over time. We see that in our longitudinal data, and the fact that they're not, over the 18-month period of time, they remain fairly constant. Again, that's without accounting for any exposure to Adelante itself. They have different magnitudes, meaning that the family is emphasized more than contribution to the community. And then environmental forces are probably impacting these magnitudes that we're observing, and the changes that we're observing, particularly in the community data. The strong-term effects that you've seen from the activities themselves that Nellie talked about, we're not yet seeing in the, over time, the longitudinal data. That may be because it takes time. So our question is, how much exposure to Adelante is required before that asset is built to a level where it can be detected, developed, so that's what we're leaning towards. And as Mark said, we have a lot of process data that we're still sifting through at different levels, from the very gross level that I showed you, participated or not participated in Adelante, down to the number of minutes that they were exposed to each of the different constructs and each of the different activities that they participated in. And so we're producing a measure of exposure that incorporates frequency, duration, intensity of exposure to all the different Adelante PYDs that will incorporate into the longitudinal data to see its a dosage effect if one impact exists. And at this point, I can't see anything more than the impact of Adelante exposure is mixed. We see great effect in terms of the short-term exposure in terms of the activities, but we're not seeing long-term effects yet.
Let me just as something to consider when you're looking at, especially when you've got dips like this. This is not unusual, actually, when you have an intervention program. It's just like when you have, let's say, you had a domestic violence program, and at the beginning, there's a spike downward in various reported impacts that people have related to domestic violence, or maybe, let me put it the other way. So let's say you have a program of domestic violence where a new intervention or a reporting system is added. So there's a spike upward, which looks like there's more domestic violence going on, but it may not be that. It's just simply that the program is in place and they're reporting it. Some effects like that may be happening with the dips and the rise, where let's say you have an intervention component where people are learning about job skills or job competence, and they, in the beginning, without knowing, let's say they're less familiar with the job context, what's out there in the world, or what skills they need to have, they may think of themselves as having a lot of competence. Sure, I know I can get this job that done. Then they go into the intervention and they learn some specifics about what's necessary for in order to be competent for various kinds of jobs and careers, and all of a sudden they're getting some knowledge they didn't have before, and they feel like, oh, I don't know that, I don't know this. So competence, feeling of competence may drop in the short term, and then it builds up again as they first they know, was it the philosopher Plato said that you must first implement knowledge, but so wow, I'm making that very philosophical. But that's probably what's, I'm going to guess. We don't know, but I'm going to guess that that's what's happening when you have those dips and then rise for a number of these programs. Where in the situations where in the Langley Park the level is higher, and Colmore, but both are dipping down, particularly in recent years, we can make guesses about what's going on there, some of which may be in the political context around immigration, increased fear, things like that. So if we're looking at people's confidence in a community or a connection to community and things like that, and all these things are going on, their general feeling of fear that the situation is not improving but going down may impact them. We just don't know. So it's something to think about. But as Sean said, we don't really, we have a lot of good short-term effects, but we don't yet have the connection between the short-term and the long-term.
So just the final note, contextually, what we realized after Save the Latinos was that we didn't actually have enough time to see an effect. And so at this point, what we've done is, what we're really measuring our outcome has changed in these PYDs over time. Yes, we have measures of violence and sexual risk and substance use, but we're really focused on whether we can impact these intermediate or mediating factors in the process to reduce the syndemic that Mark discussed earlier. So that's where we are now. We have about 10 minutes left. If anyone has any questions or comments, there is the microphone. It's small enough for you could just ask them. Would you like the diagram? Like the diagram? Can you just identify identify yourself too. So
Hi. Can you? Hi, my name is Daniela. I'm with the Marina Multicultural Youth Centers, and I was in charge of the. We used to work with Adelante, now
Okay,
as the prevention and community coordinator. So I was Angela Gonzalez. Now I work with still with MMYC, but in a program that serves runaway and homeless youth. So I wanted to add to the about the comment that you were saying, Mark, about the political climate and working in Langley Park. There are a lot of external factors that we, have been able to control, so to speak. We see a lot of, for example, bullying in the schools that we as a program or as intervention maybe cannot, we contribute a little, but sometimes what's happening in the community and the environment might be too large for us to be able to tackle everything. So that's a limitation that we've seen. Like, the need is overwhelming, and I know the intervention did a good job. I agree with you that for an intervention to work, it has to address all the levels. But Langley Park has so many needs that even more work needs to be done, and that also includes other stakeholders like the schools.
And that's a great comment, and I think that one of as we this is an exploratory research effort as we do this. I mean, it may be that part of the prescription for applying this kind of PYD model is that there are very few individual actors or organizations that are going to have sufficient funds to deal with all this stuff that's around there. So it may be that an additional component is that you really do have to include a systematized collaboration. And there are some of those that are not systematized in Langley Park. I mean, we certainly collaborate with CASA, with Central Media, with a bunch of other organizations on various things, and we have been participating in this Transforming Neighborhoods initiative, which is a broader effort by Prince George's County to have a number of stakeholders, for everything from public works to police to education to the nonprofits and health services, be there and go to regular meetings and talk about what the needs are and try to figure out how to direct resources to the needs. And that, that T&I has also been, I would have to say, having participated in things like that before, it's been relatively more effective than most of them are in trying to marshal those resources. So that's a good point and a possible, something or a lesson learned from this is that PYD in a highly stressed community, put together or put in place by a relatively small intervention, relatively, not small intervention funds, but relatively speaking, small intervention funds is not enough. So we need to do it in conjunction with other activities.
There's one other essential component to the Adelante intervention, and that's our case managers. Again, thank you, those of you sitting in the front row. We didn't show the data here, but our preliminary data shows that case management, or the number of minutes that the case manager actually is spending with each of you, has had a positive impact on many of these constructs, both on the PYD constructs, but also on the outcomes like reducing risky sexual behavior. So that is another essential component. But again, it can only be delivered at a limited scale. Because it's intensive case management, it's been challenging to serve a large number of people. So each individual and family, because it's not just the individual, but the case managers are dealing with the entire family and treating the entire family. It is a huge undertaking for each of those case managers.
Another related component that we didn't really talk about here, but because we're doing this as part of a center, and there's other activity cores within the center, but one of the ones that was very much integrated with the Adelante intervention was the various media activities that we did. And we're, I don't think we've analyzed much of the data yet there in terms of what's changes in perception and other things related to the media campaign, because the intervention, you see the logo. Okay, this is a logo developed by youth based on, it's a corner motif because a lot of youth focus groups were saying that, what they face is, struggling to turn the corner. So there was this kind of corner motif. So of course, the Adelante logo has a sunny side of the corner and a not so sunny side of the corner. That logo then became the basis for later activities, which are in a sense creating this Adelante brand. Hate to make it sound like a product, but the idea of branding is that the intervention is not just activities, but they are, what we try to do is link them together as a coherent construct. So what does Adelante mean? What does it stand for? And this is, achieving your dreams, respect, and contributing to community. So we included PYD elements in that brand identity that were also transmitted in the different kinds of media activities that are much more recent, that have that were implemented over the past year or so. So bus posters and social media and all kinds of things like that. So we don't really know yet where the impacts of that are without fitting yet either. So other questions? Comentarios?
Hello, my name is Cody Sard. I'm one of the case managers at Adelante as well. And just to add to what Mark was saying, in the past few months that we're coming to a close of the program, besides from getting a lot of attention, just the name Adelante from the community, we've been getting it a lot through the agencies. We've been having a lot of clinics, hospitals referring a lot of cases to us. So that has increased a lot in the past year.
This is what happened. Our first intervention that we had CDC funds, called Save for Latinos, it was not until the last year that we started to get a flood of people participating, recognition, trust, and demand of the community. And this is, it's one of the frustrating elements of this, is because you get a limited funding period, but it takes a long time. For SAFER, it took a long time for just to even get embedded into the community at all, much less have people trust you enough to come to, talk to you about these, violence that's happening in their household or with their kids or things like that. And so it was really, it was at the end of the project where we started to get these, this overwhelming demand for, the family counseling and other things that were part of this. And in a certain sense, it sounds a little bit like some of that is happening here too. Adelante's, sort of gets into the community, kind of like water getting into the soil. And then, and then the funding is near up, and now we're getting this, agencies are, people are saying, we want Adelante to continue, and so on and so forth. And so it may be that you really have to, and that's a message to funding agencies, that you, that you really have to have an extensive commitment in order to see some change. Yeah. There's one in the back, and one on this guy.
I can project this.
Would you like to say something?
I would just like to say that, really impressive stuff that you're talking about in terms of supporting community and asking the question, how can the community transform in order to meet the needs of young people? And I would venture to encourage you to keep on going, right? I think part of the community sectors that have not been necessarily so conducive to the trajectory of thriving communities in Latino places, for example, Cumo, right? I always wonder why law enforcement and people from the courts were so successful in taking money, millions and millions and millions of dollars in Cumo, in Seven Corners, in Northern Virginia, and convince the community that they were the ones to do gang prevention in all Northern Virginia. And so they've been having a gang prevention program within the courts, funded by millions of dollars through all the chiefs of police, and they have power over where the money goes and who the friends they're going to give it to and all this, right? And so there's this illogical thing that happens, and I wonder why they were so successful in those marketing campaigns, to allow the community to funnel all that money to them when it's people like you who should be getting those funding, right? Because who knows more about prevention? The people who have been doing prevention, public health, schools, the community, the caseworkers, the outreach workers, right? Not the court system, because they do, adjudication and they put the kids into those systems, and so they don't have the language, they don't have the root, they don't have the training or the soul to do prevention work. So I'm wondering, can we learn from the marketing campaigns that they use, right, to get all those millions, and then utilize that energy to make sure that the people that need the money and the funding and the support keep on doing the work? Because see, one of the interesting things is this, right? That when we started gang prevention in places like Humor and DC, we told folks, right, there is no magic bullet, no pun intended, or there is no magic wand. The magic wand we're trying to teach you is time, right? So give us a little bit more time to make sure that this works. And I will venture to say that we're in the same spot, right? To tell folks that what you guys need is another round. Because if you keep it going and do it, for a couple more years, you're going to be able to see the benefits, and you're going to be able to tell, right, these things. Funny thing is that now law enforcement is using the same type of approach that we used to do, right, and the same type of language to get more money, but we were criticized by saying things like, we need more time, or there is no magic bullet, or, prevention, an ounce of prevention, saves a pound of whatever. And so it's interesting that sometimes other folks are more effective in that. And I think we should have that campaign because we need it. And our young people need it, right?
There is a political component to that. I mean, you see it in the election campaign right now, law and order. And other things are phrases and other things which get oftentimes a lot more, particularly in the current Congress and things like that. I mean, there's much more funding response when you're doing a law and order program or something that appears more definitive in that way. And this is a battle programs like this always face because it's softer, it's fuzzy, it's harder to define the factors and the specific measurement tools and things like that. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, and Sean and company all have been working like whatever to try and develop these measures. But when you have law enforcement data, it's recidivism, this and that, arrests, so on and so forth, and it's there are national databases and they're all comported together and so on and so forth. And it's very much easier to go to Congress and use that terminology and the kind of data that you can get from that to get the funding. And that there is a political task there. So vote.
So what you're trying to say in Spanish, we say, otra. Another grant.
I just want to say something.
Okay, and then just to let you know, in 1 minute, they're going to raise that screen. So don't be alarmed.
Well,
Stay in your
that's
seats.
nice.
And while the screen is raising, if you
I'm
want
on
vibrations.
Rivera Group, so I work in the field in Coolmore, and I partner with these guys, and I'm with this group of people. But I want to say there is hope. I have seen it since we started in 2012, and now going back to Landry Park and going into people's home to conduct community survey, and this man showing me, look at my family, they are pictures. Wow, she's so proud. They're hanging on the wall. This is a Guatemalan mother with 5 kids. And she's so proud. She has, I don't know how many kids, but in the program, I felt, wow, this is great. Or me walking around with my t-shirt with the Adelante logo, going into DC to buy, excuse me, Uri, at McDonald's. Oh my gosh. You can imagine, after being in the field so many hours, how hungry I was. That I had to stop at McDonald's. And then the cashier tells me, oh, Adelante. She looks at my logo and she goes, Adelante. And I go, sí, señora. Yes, lady. Where do you live? She goes, Langley Park, mi niño va ahí. My kid goes there. Or the Guatemalan little girl who I met, I don't know how many years ago, and we were recruiting for cohort for Adelante. And I met this very shy, I think 14, 15 years old, I remember 13 years old, so shy, so vulnerable. And we go and talk about, if you like to participate, the cohort, and then, they were really, really apprehensive. Lack of trust is high. But finally, they went, I go back 2 years later. She goes, it's another little girl. She's so outgoing. She said, señora, I had my quinceañera, and I went to Adelante, and she's talking about all these things. So, and anecdotes, what people say, what people share, being in the field, and we're seeing very little improvement, but people are recognizing the brand. They're talking about Adelante, and we're seeing things. So, congratulations, guys, and I hope you can continue with this great program. And,
just adding one, I agree with you, time is what we need. Right now, it's been 5 years now, and I've seen our parents who participate in our PALS program and our leadership programs. They are really taking off, and I know there's this group, community group of parents, a lot of them participate in our Adelante programs that has been meeting for 2 years now, and now it's evolving into a more formal group who's going to be actually coordinating the TNI. And so I think exactly what Juan said is something that just needs a long-term work, and I think hopefully 5 years from now, those parents are going to be doing bigger things, and it's just something that we're just going to have to see. But anecdotally, there's a lot of stories that we see changes. I had youth tell me yesterday, actually, Ricardo was talking to one of the youth, and he asked him, what would have happened to you if Adelante hadn't been in your life? And he said, I would be dead. He said that. And so those little stories, that they really touches that we working in the field, those are the stories that we're proud of, and even if it's just one youth, it's for us, it's like we're proud of the work that we're doing. So Adelante was great great opportunity for us to do that, and we hope that maybe it's not going to look like Adelante, but we think this community.
Well, we're going to do our best to try and keep the funding going. So, really.
Great. Thank you all for coming this afternoon.
So you go ahead